Hi, I'm Andrea Brockmeyer. I'm the Director of Project Management at Watermark Learning, and I work with a lot of folks pursuing PMI certification. And there's a couple of things that I think are really helpful for people to understand about PMI certifications. The first is that PMI certifications are not book-based exams. The exams for certification are not based on any of the standards or publications, with the exception of the CAPM. They're role-based exams. And that really can be a fundamental difference in terms of how you approach your certification prep. So to understand how exams are created, there's a couple of different things to keep in mind. First is the process that they go through in developing their exams. And actually at PMI, we're pretty fortunate to have this process. Not all certifications and certification granting institutions have this process, but we've got this very time-tested and standardized approach to exam development. So the first thing that they do when they're going to develop a new exam is they do what's called a role delineation study, or an RDS. And what they do is they send people out into the field, people from all different kinds of industries around the world, and they say, go look and see what it is that project managers do. So they go out and they take a look. What are project managers doing these days? What kinds of things do they do? What kinds of things do they need to know about? And they come up with what they call the role delineation study. Here's what project managers do. They do things like initiate projects, plan projects, execute projects, whatever. From that, then, they create an exam content outline. And this captures the information from the RDS. And what it does is it identifies the things that you need to test people on in order to determine that they're qualified to do those things. So this actually becomes a blueprint for the exam. We're going to test them on these kinds of things, and here are the tasks that they need to be able to do in these domains, right? And this is not unique to the PMP, just to bear in mind. Any PMI exam, again, with the exception of the CAPM, goes through this process. So once we have the ECO, then the last thing they do is they check it against the current standards. What are the PMI standards that we have right now that we need to make sure that the language in the ECO is consistent with? For example, the PMBOK, or the Guide to Business Analysis, or the BA Practice Guide, or the Agile Practice Guide. We want to make sure that the terms that we're using, the language that we're using, is consistent with those current publications, and that they're rooted in the profession's body of knowledge, that this is consistent with how people are talking out in the field. And from there, then, that's how they develop the exam. So why is this important? Because there are a couple of things that drive exam changes, PMI exam changes. One is when there is an update to a standard. One is when there is an update to an RDS. And those are qualitatively different kinds of changes. When there is a change to a standard, the exam gets updated to comply with any changes in the standards, terminology-wise, to make the exam consistent with the terminology. You know, there are updates, but it's not a wholesale rewrite of the exam. When people have been in the field, however, and determined that practitioners are doing something different, or that they need to know something different, when there is a change to that, resulting in a change to the ECO, that is a more fundamental change to the exam. Okay? So both of these happen every maybe 4 or 5 years, something like that, but this is going to result in a much more substantial exam change than will something like this. So our most recent example, the PBA, was updated June 25th of 2018 as a result of this. Was it a wholesale rewrite of the exam? No. What came into play? The Guide to Business Analysis, released in November of 2017. So the exam was updated to be consistent with the terminology in that publication. There will be, at some point, a change in the role delineation study, which will be a much more substantial change to the exam. So I hope this has been helpful to you and gives you some context for understanding changes to PMI exams. And all the best to you in your pursuits of PMI certification.